play.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time it is in the world, wherever you are tuning in from. Gemma is in the UK, I believe.
Yeah.
So it is early evening there, just past 6 in the evening. Gemma, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I've just finished a day of tennis coaching, so doing my other job when I'm not doing tennis reporting. So had a busy day.
Tell us a bit about that before we get into the Australian Open and what happened there. Tell us a bit about your coaching career and where you're at.
Yeah, I've been an assistant coach for a long time, but like sort of the back end of last year, I had a couple of health problems, and I got encouraged to take my level 2 to become a coach because I had been an assistant for a long time. My coach for my wheelchair tennis has now moved to Melbourne. He's left me. He's left me in the UK, and he's moved to Melbourne to coach, and so I've kind of taken over some of his classes. So I mostly teach either the disability sessions at the club or the inclusive sessions at the club, or because I used to be a primary school teacher. So I do teach like what we have in the UK. I don't know whether it translates across the world, but it's called Blue Crew and Mini Red, which are kind of ages 3 to 8. So there's lots of talk of Paw Patrol, Peppa Pig, as well as tennis.
Got it. Yeah. So who are your youngest students and who are your oldest in terms of the tennis court?
My youngest students are 3. So, that's quite young. But some of them are quite confident. I'm like, I wish I was that confident when I was 3 years old. And my oldest student at the minute is probably about sort of 14 or 15.
Okay, fine. Let's get into the Australian Open. Unfortunately, Gemma wasn't there in person. Fingers crossed we'll be back there next year. But lots to look forward to in terms of the wheelchair tournaments this year, obviously being an Olympic year. So plenty of chances and that Gemma will be there in person. But of course, you were also still very much involved. I think you were telling me before we went live that you did a lot of interviews via WhatsApp and other forms, right?
Yeah, I think it's what's great actually. I mean, all credit to Tennis Australia. I think, I was saying to you, because of my health, it was I was probably giving Tennis Australia whiplash because I kept saying I am coming, I'm not, because I found out I had accreditation in November, and I was like, I am coming. Oh no, I'm not. The doctors won't let me. Oh no, I am coming. And about 2 days before the wheelchair draw started, I was like, doctors have said I can't come now, but with lightning speed reactions, they set me up so that I stayed up overnight, had WhatsApps with the players and interviews. So I just requested my interviews in the normal way, had WhatsApps with players. And I think from an access point of view, like I obviously mentor a lot of disabled journalists as well. And one of their biggest barriers is actually getting to the events, because not all events are accessible. Australian Open is accessible, but not all events are accessible. But the fact the Australian Open were able to do that with me, so I could still continue working and still continue earning a living, even though I couldn't take a long haul flight for medical reasons. I think a lot of tournaments, a lot of sports events can learn from that, because it doesn't lessen the experience. I still got the interviews that I needed. I still got the job done that I needed. It was just in a different way. And I think for me, Tennis Australia stand out there because they are so good at adapting and so good at realizing that just sometimes it's not possible to be there in person.
Yeah, right. I mean, COVID did teach us that we can do some of these things from a distance, whether it be our regular day jobs or attending press conference stuff. And Gemma, I think you're needed because from what you were telling me in New York, sometimes these press conferences are not so well attended, even for the finals. So your attendance is very much invaluable for whether it be the audience or the players as well. So that's great. Okay, let's get into let's start with a record breaker, shall we?
Yeah.
In Dida de Groot, I hope I'm saying her name right, because records certainly fell in Melbourne regarding her run to the title, because she has cemented herself among the legends of wheelchair tennis by winning the singles title. Tell us why.
Yeah, so there's so previously Shingo Kaneda held the record for most number of Grand Slams run consecutively in singles, and he won 12. And Dida winning the Australian Open this year means she's won 13 in a row. The sad thing is that this year she started the year brilliantly, but she cannot do the Golden Slam this year because there will be no wheelchair tennis at the US Open.
Yeah,
On,
yeah.
so everybody's like, oh, is she going to do the Golden Slam again? There's only been one year when that was possible, and that was in 2021 when we had Tokyo. And she won it in 2021 because all 4 slams were run, because there wasn't this kind of clashing between the slams. Um, so she can't do the Golden Slam again, but I still think she's going to be the one to beat all year. I think she's probably the favourite to take home the Paralympic gold, as well as the other slams. She's a brilliant player. I mean, you look at what records fell there, and then obviously she's now equalled Esther Vergeer, who is arguably the goat of wheelchair tennis. Do you know? I love it that all the women are the headline makers in wheelchair tennis. It's great because it's like disability sport and women's sport in one.
Hmm.
The headlines, but Esther Vergeer, she got 21 Grand Slam singles titles, and Dida now has 21 Grand Slam singles titles. Obviously, we have to preface that by Esther won her 21 Grand Slam singles titles at a time when wheelchair tennis was very different and there were fewer opportunities. But nevertheless, she still equalled the record. Can she now go forward and absolutely smash the record and make it difficult for people to beat her in the future?
I mean, she's 27. So, I mean, maybe tell us a bit about wheelchair tennis players. How long are they tending to play tennis for? I mean, 27 to me sounds like she's got plenty of opportunities left yet.
Oh yeah, she's got plenty of opportunities. I mean, if you look in the quad division, you've got players who are 60 and plus. I think Dida's in the women's open division, which means the career won't be quite as long. But I mean, she doesn't even look like she's slowing down. She's been playing since she was a junior. So her and Alfie Hewett went through the juniors together. Um, so she's had that foundation of being on the junior tour to go into the senior tour. It feels like both her and Alfie have been on tour for years, and that's because of when they were doing the transition. So sort of when they were sort of mid-teenage years, they were also playing in the senior draw as well as the junior draws. It's it feels like they've been around the senior tour a long time, but for some of those years, they were also competing in junior tournaments as well.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us then also a little bit about. I want to get back to this US Open topic before we move on to other events in Australia, because I remember we talked about this in September, just after the US Open last year, and I'm disappointed that they couldn't have found a solution somewhere, somehow in the calendar.
Yeah, I mean, I did before I left go, I don't think I'll see you next year unless, and I think the thing is they're talking about court space. So I know there was a push to do the wheelchair during qualifying, the qualifying weeks, because actually the argument is that as players they're used to going around the world just as the pedestrian players are, and they're used to getting over jet lag quickly and getting themselves in match mode. So it was a possibility, but I think it's to do with court space. There has been, I think I read a couple of weeks ago a development that because obviously it's not just for wheelchair players, it's about the amount of prize money they're losing. The amount of money they win at Grand Slams compared to the amount of money you win on tour the rest of the year. That tens of thousands a potential winner is losing from not having um, the US Open, and I think there's been an update that the USTA are going to offer some prize money, even though the tournament's not going to be run,
Okay.
because so that these players don't lose out, and they don't lose out financially. Because obviously, when you go into the Paralympics, you're competing for your country, you don't get paid for it. And wheelchair tennis is quite unique in the fact that um, when it's not the Paralympics, they are on a professional tour where they get paid and earn a living. A lot of Paralympians in other sports do it for the love of it and don't get prize money and don't earn a living out of it. They have other jobs. So it's very difficult when you miss one of those kind of big payers out there, and also the big stage. What's going to happen? I think I'd be interested to see, because Obviously, wheelchair tennis won't be there at this year's US Open. Will it get forgotten about, and will it be the same push in, say, 2025 to actually go, oh yeah, wheelchair tennis is at the US Open? We should take notice of it as well.
I will just sort of give a final comment on why we're having this chat. Maybe I didn't make it clear to our audience as well. Is because, of course, because they might be thinking, well, hang on a second, we've got the Olympics that comes between Wimbledon, I think, and the US Open, and that's sort of a fairly smooth transition, albeit from different surfaces. But of course, because the Paralympics takes place after the Olympics, and therefore happens at a similar time to what the US Open will be, that's why there's a clash in the calendar. I still find it unfathomable that they haven't managed to find space, whether that be on the US Open site or somewhere else. I mean, hold the US Open somewhere else if necessary, in my opinion. I mean, there is money around the sport, and I look at the sport in a way, Gemma, as a collective. You know, whether it be, you know, a bit like a country in terms of a political situation where, you know, there may be affluent areas of a country, but we all sort of pull each other and we all get along, and that helps make the whole thing much better. But I find that tennis is still certainly not united, whether it be ATP and WTA tours or whether it be wheelchair or doubles or whatever. But then, anyway, hopefully that's quite clear now for our audience. Sean is in the chat and has a question for you, Gemma, just about wheelchair tennis compared to sort of other wheelchair sports. Do you see that wheelchair tennis gets more prominence or less prominence, or has the same issues that maybe other wheelchair sports do?
I think among the Paralympic sports, wheelchair tennis is one of the most known, and I think it is because of having that tour and having lots of things going on outside of the Paralympics. I still don't think it's as promoted as it could be, but I'd say sort of like wheelchair tennis, wheelchair basketball. Like in the UK here, we have a professional wheelchair basketball league where people are paid professionally, and it's a women's league as well. So they've opted to go for the women's league first, to be those professionally paid league. So sports that are really like realizing that these people are full-time athletes are getting more coverage. But I think the beauty of the Paralympics as well, as it is in the Olympics, you discover sports you didn't know existed. Like I remember doing my first Olympics and Paralympics reporting, and you know the synchronized swimming, like where they wanted to do the team. I was like, is this a thing? They're dancing in water and stuff like that. So I think that's the beauty of the Paralympics. And I don't think wheelchair tennis. I think wheelchair tennis in a way loses out in the Paralympics because it's a more known sport in a way. And obviously, we've had a lot of debate over the Australian Open this year about how long those men's matches went on, you know, and how long reporters, players, ball kids, everything was spending on court, and something needs to change. I think as well, because in a Paralympic broadcasting sense, you never know how long a wheelchair tennis match is going to last. You know, it could last 45 minutes, it could be last an hour and a half. So actually, here in the UK, it's not on a broadcaster's agenda necessarily. It's not top of the agenda to show during the Paralympics. So it's people like me who go to the stadium daily and provide updates that mean that the stuff gets known about, because the Paralympic broadcasters just want to dip in, dip out, dip in, dip out, and you can't really do that with a tennis match. So you know, they don't actually get as much coverage at the Paralympics. If you actually look, it's kind of mostly the athletics and stuff like that we see a lot of. So it's why it's so important that when it's not Paralympic year and they're on at the Grand Slams, that we actually pay attention to it, because that's your chance to really watch matches. And to be fair, the journey and the story that you saw in that Yannick Sinner final happens exactly the same in wheelchair tennis matches. They don't play 5 sets, thank goodness. But do you know what? I've been in some 3-setters in wheelchair tennis that have lasted 4 hours. So I'm not saying that playing 3 sets would shorten it any. But yeah, so it's really important to give that platform to wheelchair tennis outside of the Paralympics as well, because it's, you know, these disability sporting events are great platforms, not just for highlighting the athletes, but for highlighting what sports you can do at a grassroots level. You know, like I said, I coach, and So I kind of know the sport from grassroots level up. And it's really important we get more people playing at grassroots level, whether they intend to compete or not. Like, you can still, if you're playing wheelchair tennis, you don't have to. I mean, there's this automatic assumption that, oh, you're disabled, you do a sport, your wish is to go to the Paralympics. You want to be a Paralympian. It's not that, you know. I always say that I like cake too much to be disciplined enough to be a Paralympian. And I quite like going to the Paralympics and being in the media room. um, and seeing all of the sports and how they go together. So I think in disability sport at the minute, there's like this disconnect where everybody who takes up a sport automatically wants to be a Paralympian, and that's not the case. And that's what I hope I do, working at grassroots level as a coach as well, is show disabled people that you don't have to want to wish for that gold medal. There are other routes into sport, into tennis, where you can help out at grassroots level and be a role model there, or you can literally go to all 4 Grand Slams. Did I ever think that I would go to all 4 Grand Slams and the Paralympics to report? No. I mean, that was like a pipe dream. But I've had these opportunities to go. So yeah, I'm not a Paralympian, but you know, I've had some pretty awesome opportunities.
With I'm reminded of a Murray Walker, who's a Formula One commentator, for those not aware, a comment from decades ago when he first got into sports media, which is if you can do, if you can't, talk about it.
Yeah.
So I certainly fall into that category too, as someone who wanted to be a football player or a tennis player, loving each sport equally, but realizing that maybe that isn't going to happen. So the next best thing is to write about it and talk endlessly, as we are doing here. Gemma, let's get into some of the other action down under. We had Alfie Hewett losing the wheelchair singles final to Tokito Oda, which I believe is a reversal of what happened last year. Is that right?
Yeah, so last year's Australian Open was Tokito's first Australian Open final, and it was Alfie's fourth, I believe. This year was Tokito's second Australian Open final and Alfie's fifth. And the tables were turned. But I think when people are watching these two, I think what is really interesting is how they are pushing the boundaries of what is possible in wheelchair tennis. Like, every time you see these two play each other, they bring out something new. And like, Tokito was playing tennis like we've never seen him before play, and that's difficult it's scary how young these two are as players and how much they're pushing the boundaries. What I will love to follow and love to see is how, when they get to the end of their careers, the men's wheelchair tennis game has changed, because you know, we're talking pedestrian tennis about players that push the game forward, whether that's with tactical or technique, or you know, even just personality. This is exactly what's happening with these two in the men's division. They are pushing and pushing and pushing boundaries, and every time one of them loses to the other, they go back to the drawing board and they find another way to come out on top. And it's really exciting to see, because when I think of wheelchair tennis and the men's, even the men's open division, all of the divisions, to be fair, when I first started reporting on it, where it is now, the level that's being played and everything, and the professionalism, it's far removed from what was there when I first started. So I think these two's journeys will be really important. And actually, Dida mentioned it when I spoke to her after she won the title, and she said it's like, you know, her in the women's game, these youngsters in the juniors are looking up to her and Alfie and Tokito and seeing what they're doing and saying the minimum we have to do to be up there one day is exactly what they're doing. So they're now influencing the next generation, but the next generation are probably thinking, I have to go better than that. So it will be interesting to see how things develop in the game as the years go on, because of the boundaries that are being pushed right now.
Which of the tournaments, Gemma, do they? So we know the slams, albeit this year not the US Open, but we know the slams and have a wheelchair tournament running alongside it. But to the casual or the average tennis observer who watches Madrid, Indian Wells, Rome, Queens maybe as well, but I'm thinking of sort of the 1000s in particular. Which of those also do have wheelchair events running alongside them?
So in a few weeks, we've got Rotterdam, the ATP Tour event.
I know.
So
Yeah.
that is actually the tournament director for that is the legend that is Esther Vergeer. And what's really great with them is they haven't limited it to the men. So the women since last year, the women have been able to compete there as well. So Rotterdam's coming up. There's just been an announcement today that the Rio Open is going to have a wheelchair tennis tournament. It's been all over Instagram today. Alfie's had
Yes,
it
I
on
did
his
see that. Yeah, I did see that.
yeah. Alfie's had it on his Instagram as well, saying he can't wait for it. And I believe the
Is
Miami
Alfie
Open.
coming? Is Alfie going?
Yeah, so I think even though he's retired, Shingo's going to be there. So you'll get to see a little blast from the not too distant past. He only retired last year. Gordon, Alfie, and one of the Brazilian players. So they're showcasing their homegrown talent as well through it. And then the Miami Open, I believe, is also showcasing wheelchair tennis. Interestingly, Shingo is, I believe, if I've read his Instagram correctly, I'm not the best at translating Japanese, but he's going to be the tournament director for the Miami Open. So that's also going to be showcasing wheelchair tennis. We've obviously got Queen's Eastbourne in the run up to Wimbledon that showcases wheelchair tennis. So there's actually a lot of opportunities now where if you're at one of those tournaments watching, or if you're watching it at home on the live stream, you can actually cross over to another court and actually have a good watch of wheelchair tennis. And when you're seeing the players at that event, it is like, you're talking about the top 20 players, in some cases the top 8 players in the world. So you are seeing the best of the best when you're seeing them alongside in these tournaments.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
I did ask you. Like, go on, Gemma. Say something.
I think it's still important that they have their own tour as well.
Okay.
Because I remember having a debate with one editor, and I said I think it's disgraceful. I think it was after the US Open and Roland Garros. I think it's disgraceful that the wheelchair tennis players are 5 minutes from their media room and they don't bother with them in the Grand Slams.
Oh, yeah.
And an editor said to me, I won't mention who it was, but an editor said to me, yeah, but the problem is when they compete alongside the well, they said able-bodied tennis players. I will say pedestrian tennis players. When they compete alongside the pedestrian tennis players, we don't have time to interview them. And I said, yeah, but then you use the argument that when they're on their own tour, you don't have time to get to their tournaments. So hang on, where do we win and lose here? You haven't got time when they're literally on your doorstep, but you haven't got time to make the effort to go to another tournament in a different place. So I think there's still a lot of that around, which I'd love to, I'm hoping. I think the problem is with the last 2 Paralympics is they've been very different. Like, I will say Rio dropped the ball massively. Like,
Okay.
all of the drama around it and wondering whether the Paralympics was even going to happen because they spent so much money on the Olympics. They dropped the ball quite when you think you had London 2012 before that and there was so much hope. And then Tokyo obviously happened. Tokyo the Japanese are really supportive of disability sports. So I was really looking forward to them hosting. But then obviously COVID happened and it changed the way that the tournament took place and it changed the way that media could even get there or be there. And so I'm hoping Paris are going to take it and bring the Paralympic movement back into the psyche of everybody. And we build up from there because I think I always say I'm done with the fact that I've now been doing this job for 10 years. And every time it feels like every 4 years, I'm a bit like the athletes. I'm a jack in the box that people pop out every 4 years to have a chat about. I mean, not you guys, you have me on all the time, but mainstream media pops out every 4 years, pop me out my jack in box every 4 years because, it's the Paralympic year, so we have to mention it. And then I disappear for 3 years and I'm not, I'm told I'm not needed or my subject matter is too niche and there's not enough fans for it. And I just think that's not an excuse anymore. There are plenty of fans. We see it at Wimbledon. I talked to you about Wimbledon, about Gordon and Alfie's doubles final on court number 1. I mean, the atmosphere, the people. I don't think it's an excuse anymore. I think we've had wheelchair tennis at so many of these big tournaments and the crowds that turn out for it it's not an excuse anymore that you haven't got the interest or the fans for it.
All right, Gemma, I think that's pretty comprehensive. Back to Melbourne. In the quad doubles, we had Andy Lapthorne and alongside his American partner, or it's an American pairing, I believe, with David Wagner winning their 9th Grand Slam title against Paddy, I think I'm saying the name right, and Sasson. 6-4, 3-6, 10-2. I guess that's a deciding set tiebreak, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, what's really nice is it was 10 years on from. So we've seen Andy and David partner each other a lot on tour, and it was 10 years on from their first Australian Open doubles title together that they won it this year. So it was quite a nice celebration of an anniversary, really. I think these two are great, and I think I interviewed them afterwards, and I told them that I felt that it wasn't just a tennis match they played; it was a perfectly executed game of chess. I mean, looking at the side, looking at it, you would have probably looked because obviously the quad division is getting stronger just as the open division is, and you'd have gone, "Oh, will they be okay?" Because obviously having Donald on the other side, who Andy has partnered to Grand Slam trophies as well, and Guy on the other side. You would go, oh, I don't know which way this is going to go. But what was really great was it was classic, what we call Lapo and Wags. So people say Lapo and Wags for Andy and David. And you just saw Andy just prowling that baseline, setting David up. And the timing with which David constantly hit those volleys with the angle was brilliant, because it was like he knew when to do it. And he felt so safe in Andy being at the back, backing him up. And he was so confident that when he did hit that volley, it was going to deliver the killer blow. There was no, yeah, they're going to get it back. And the angles they were finding, the way they were intelligently kind of finding ways to beat Donald and Guy was brilliant to watch. And that's what I was saying. You know, there's always the debate of quad tennis isn't as exciting as open tennis. I'm like, if you watch it, it's actually incredibly, like, the tennis brains that belong to those quad division players. I mean, I'm envious of. And it was an emotional one for Andy as well, because he'd just found out his uncle had died a few days before the Australian Open had started, and he was very emotional. And I think he was kind of thinking, he went out of the singles in the quarterfinals, and I know he wanted, from talking to him, he wanted to do something in the doubles. He wanted to have success in the doubles, because he wanted to make sure it was worth, you know, missing his uncle's funeral for and being over there, because he was obviously halfway across the world when it was all going on. And I think I was emotional when him and David won it, because I was like, I wanted them. I've got to be impartial as a journalist, but to be fair, Andy is a Brit, so I can kind of go in his corner as well. But knowing the story, like where Andy was all week, I was like, when they hit that winning shot, and it was the tie break, like it was, they did drop a bit in the second set, which is why we had a match tie break. But the tie break David and Andy played, I mean, I think I saw Lapo play some of the best tennis, hit some of the best shots of the tournament, like 8 in a row. Because and they just that tie break was, they were dominant. There was no question they were going to win that tie break. Probably, I think it was probably when they were it was sort of like when they were 5 up, you kind of went, yeah, they've got to do a lot wrong now to lose this. But still, it's tennis. That could have happened, but luckily it didn't.
Gemma, for those tuning in who've not watched a lot of wheelchair tennis, tell us about maybe 1 or 2 of the rules that maybe we're not familiar with. I mean, you know, how many times can the ball bounce? Do they play? Do they play the same, like, tram lines are for doubles and singles for the singles court? And is the court identical? Any other differences you think we might not be aware of?
Yeah, so the courts, rackets, balls, everything in the same size, same type that you see the pedestrian gameplay with. The only difference is the 2 bounces, 2 bounce rules. So the first bounce has to land inside the court, but the second bounce can land anywhere, as long as the first, and it's the same with the serve. The first bounce has to land in the service box, but the second bounce can land anywhere, which makes for actual interesting gameplay. Because, I mean, I know from me training, you're taught when you serve, try and get that second bounce of the serve behind the baseline because it pushes your opponent so
I was
far back.
thinking that. Yeah, I was
Um,
thinking.
and it stops them coming forward. I mean, I think about Alfie in his early days. Me and another commentator, Bob Ballard, kept saying that we were going to put like an alarm on Alfie's chair because he's brilliant. Alfie's brilliant when he's coming forward and he's on the attack. But when in the early days, people used to know that if they pushed him back behind the court, they could get one better on him. He's obviously kind of, worked on that now, but we did used to make a comment that we wished we could put a buzzer so that every time he went a certain distance behind the baseline, it would buzz at him and remind him that he needed to get in. But it does make for interesting tactics. I mean, when you're watching wheelchair tennis at the Grand Slams, particularly in the men's and women's open division, you won't actually see the two bounces used a lot. Like a lot of players will go in on that first bounce. So probably if you've been watching some matches, you'll be like, is there two bounces? Oh, I didn't know that, because you've seen them use one bounce so much. But we had a moment where two bounces was used in this Australian Open. I know Eurosport kept replaying it. It was in Gordon and Alfie's doubles final, which they won. Tokito Oda hit a beautifully angled shot, and you were like, nobody's getting that. Then up comes Alfie and just fires back with an even more beautiful angle. I mean, he got quite near to the ball kid when he did it, but it was the shot of the tournament for me. And you saw how the two bounces can be used because it gave him time to get there and think and go, right, I'm not just going to get the ball in play, I'm going to try and hit a winner here. So it is used still in that level of the game. But if you were watching it at home, you would have gone, oh, hang on a minute, but I saw them and they used one bounce. They only used one bounce a lot of the time. But every player, no matter what level, is entitled to two bounces. We do have foot faults in wheelchair tennis, like they do in standing tennis, but it's not about where your feet are. It's about you've got a picture up of my Twitter right now. If you look in my Twitter picture, you'll see I've got two very tiny wheels at the front of my tennis chair. And I've got two very tiny wheels. If they kind of are your foot fault. So if those two tiny wheels go over the line at the wrong point in the serve, you will get a foot fault. I often find myself explaining that to people because people come, like when I'm in Nottingham at the British Open, they're going, but how can it be a foot fault because they're in a wheelchair? And I'm going, because those two wheels act as our feet, and we still have to follow the rules. And you can't kind of get an advantage on your serve by kind of coming into the court. So they're kind of, foot faults are rules anyway, but yeah, the only real difference you'll see is the two bounces. There's a difference in movement. So obviously as a wheelchair user, you can't move laterally. You can't move side to side. So you won't see side steps. You won't see those kind of things. You'll see what is known as a figure of eight movement in wheelchair tennis, which is where you'll often see players come forward and then go back to the baseline and forward and back to the baseline. It's not as simple as sidestepping to each side of the court, and you have to be so aware of your court positioning. If you're watching singles, that's why you will see there's not a lot of serve and volley in the game, because once you get up near the net, that's danger zone and an easy lob, unless you're like Alfie and Tokito and you can move the chair like as speedily as they do. But in doubles, you will see that thing of having the person at the net. Anybody who's watched Alfie and Gordon will know that, one of their strengths is they're at the net. But I think even in the women's final this year, we saw such variation because actually over the years, women's doubles finals have been more baseline. What we saw in this year's Australian Open and what we've been seeing over the last couple of Grand Slams is that the variety is creeping in and the players are getting a little bit more confident at coming into the net.
We did touch on obviously Alfie Hewett losing the singles final to Tokito Oda, but some kind of revenge was exacted in the doubles because him alongside Gordon Reid won their fifth successive Australian Open, beating Oda and his Japanese partner Takuya Miki in the final. Maybe have a quick word on Hewett and Reid, who you just spoke about.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting actually going into this Paralympic year, because if you'd been speaking to me like 3 years ago, it was them two versus the French pair. They were kind of the ones winning the Grand Slams. What I think is really interesting now is a lot of countries are partnering up their two best players in preparation for the games, and you don't know, and the headline isn't to is it going to be the French or is it going to be the British? The headline is, the Japanese have two quite strong doubles partnerships, really, and in Oda and Mickey, and there's another Japanese partnership as well just below them, who Gordon and Alfie played in the semi-finals, I believe. So, but what's really interesting is that Gordon and Alfie lost the US Open title. They lost in the semi-finals, but it's how they come back. It's how they come back, and they continuously still win. They're not happy, I think in my time reporting on them, the minute they lose a doubles title, the next tournament you need to watch out, because they are like on the prowl to get their reputation back. And they are the ones to beat. They are the ones that kind of, Dida talked about before the Australian Open, that she does feel she has a target on her back in singles, because she has that run of so many unbeaten matches, and she has that run of so many Grand Slam titles. I think probably Alfie and Gordon were feeling the same last year, because they'd had such a good year, and probably constantly feel like that. But I think my best moment was when speaking to them after they'd won the title. So it was the night of the Traitors final here in the UK. If anybody knows that program, there's a program called The Traitors. So it's basically it's like a murder mystery weekend on the television. Okay. So I asked them the question, who would make a good traitor and who would make a good faithful? And we found out Alfie has the board game of the Traitors, but has never seen it. But Gordon believed he would make a better traitor because he had a better poker face than Alfie. And Alfie's too emotional to fool people into thinking he's a traitor. So it was you could still have fun with the guys after the match as well. You could ask the serious question about how they played, but then you could have fun with them as well and say, so what I tend to do when I do social media around these things is pick a trend that might trend that night to try and ask a question around it, and then I can hashtag that trend in as well, and then hopefully it brings it to the attention of people. So like just before the Traitors final that night, I put Gordon's quote about who would make a good traitor and who would make a good faithful up on Twitter, just so that if people were searching the Traitors hashtag, they would also see Gordon and Alfie and on what they'd achieved. So even though they weren't all over the news, they were all over Traitors Twitter, which is great. I'd urge anybody to watch it if you haven't seen it. I was completely hooked to it. Probably a little bit fun. Yeah, so basically it's a certain number of people are picked to be traitors, and if they are still in the final at the end, they nick all of the money that's been won from the faithful, no matter, even if one of them's there. And so the faithful's job is to work out who all the traitors are and get them out. Otherwise they don't get the money, because if there's even one of those traitors left, then they don't get anything, the faithful. So I won't spoil what happened at the end of this happened to this season, just in case people haven't watched all the way through it. But all I will say is, if once you do get to the final, I was heartbroken for Molly.
There's a Netflix series this reminds me of as well, but I can't remember for the life of me the name. It's not The Traitor, but it's something, just one word, I think. The Mole, I think it is, where there's one bad person and you just got to guess who it is amongst the 15 or 20 of them, I think, as they try and there's one person who's trying to undermine the whole operation, basically. Anyway, back to the tennis. There's at least one more tournament I want to speak about, because the group's success didn't end in the singles, of course. She also sealed the doubles title alongside Jiske Griffionen. I think I'm saying that's something either close to right or probably completely wrong, but fingers crossed. Beating, and according to one source at least I have on the Aussie Open website, where it says outplaying the South African-Japanese duo of Mondjana and Kamiti, 6-3, 7-6. They won that final. So the group had another barnstorming tournament down under.
Yeah, she did. And I think what you had in that women's doubles final was two of the best teams in the world. They're two best teams, so they were the top seeds. Yui and KG are not easy to beat. I think Yui and KG would admit that they didn't have their best day on court in that doubles final, but equally Yiska and Dida had a really good day on court. Like the way they were dominating points. I mean, the second set was a little bit closer. They were always one behind. You know, Yui and KG were always one behind, but the way they came out in that opening set and just brought their game and forced Yui and KG to play their game, to play their doubles game, was quite, commendable. Yiska actually, she has won the Wimbledon singles title before. She retired in 2017. Said she was retiring from tennis because she was having a family. So we talked a lot, in the pedestrian draw, in the main draws, they've talked a lot about female athletes coming back as mothers. Well, Yiska's one of those athletes in the wheelchair tennis draw. So she said, no, I'm retiring from tennis, not doing it again, having a baby, having a family. And she came back sort of like 18 months ago into the Grand Slams, but she'd started playing on the tour a bit before that. And and she's doing just as well as she was when she was playing before she retired. I mean, it's quite interesting to see. Like, she has taken time away from the tour, but like most of the Dutch players, there's just something in the water in the Netherlands when it comes to wheelchair tennis. I mean, if you look at the divisions, men's divisions, you've got Tom Egberink and Michael Scheffers and Ruben Spargaren, who's coming through. Women's division, you've got Aniek, you've got Dida, you've got Yiska, and a young player called Lizzie de Grief, who actually was at the US Open this year. Really exciting young Dutch player. And then if you look in the quads division, you've got Sam Schroeder and Niels Vink. I mean, I don't know what they've got in the Netherlands, but they breed really good wheelchair tennis players.
We do see it amongst pedestrian players too, Gemma. But do we also see it maybe even more, at least to the same extent, where certain nationalities are seemingly on the outside excelling, but maybe there's something to do with taking wheelchair tennis more seriously than other countries going on? Well, you mentioned the Netherlands, but you could also probably apply that to the UK, Australia, maybe to a lesser extent the US, South Africa, and definitely Japan, I guess. Is there something going on as well in terms of structures?
Yeah, I think, like, if you look at the LTA structure, I think what's happening as well is they're identifying, because young disabled people have greater access to opportunities. Like, so the LTA here have an open court program, which is to remove barriers for people with disabilities or from low socioeconomic backgrounds, or even girls and women, to take up tennis, to just remove those barriers that they face. And so what we're now seeing is when the LTA are developing or identifying players that could do well on the tour, the kids are getting younger and younger and younger. So when we look at the pedestrian form of the game, when you look at the county system that's set up here in the UK, those kids are getting spotted at 8, 9, 10 to become like top ATP and WTA players. It's starting to get it's that age group as well with wheelchair tennis. I do a lot of consultation with clubs about wheelchair tennis and adding wheelchair tennis to the program as well. And I say, look, don't just think there's this kind of preconception that disabled people are older. And I'm not older, but there's this preconception that the demographic they're paying to is like 50 and 60 years old because it's disability. And I'm like, no, what you need to realize is what's going on in that elite level and that performance pathway, to realize that you need to get 8, 9-year-olds in hitting those balls to be able to if they do want to make it a career, because it is a realistic career now. Like, when I first started reporting, it wasn't, but if you're top 20 with the slams extending and stuff, it becomes more realistic to make it your full-time career. And I think with the likes of Alfie and Dida starting it off where they were successful juniors and at the top of the rankings in the juniors, but also in the top 20 of the senior draws, the senior rankings at the same time, I think the way wheelchair tennis is moving forward. Also Japan, for a long time, we talked about Shingo and Yui and that they were the Japanese players. There's something happening there. Maybe it's a result of Tokyo 2021 and the Paralympics and Olympics being there and the investment they're making into the sport there, that we now have this, when you enter tournaments or when you see tournaments, there's this bulk of Japanese players as well, which means that they're developing. And, you know, when you see the way Tokito plays, you know, you can see that a lot of time's been spent with him. I would say the American system, although the Americans don't champion parasport as much, the actual American tennis system that the USTA have is very good. You have the likes of Dana Mathewson coming out. David Wagner's been a great role model for so long, you know, coming through with the Americans. You know, we talk about it in the main draw. There's a bunch of Americans coming through, but you've got people like Casey Ratzlaff and people like that, and you've got people coming through, and Miley Phelps in the women's coming through and doing some great things on tour. It's just they're not quite in the Grand Slams yet. So I would say the US system is still quite a good system but you have got those countries that really push forward, and then you've got the likes, well, South Africa have the greatest ambassador in the form of Kothatso Monjane. She is, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, she's like a beacon of light. In that South Africa isn't known for its tennis, but somehow when it comes to a sports award season in South Africa, KG's name's always up there, and that's not just among disabled athletes, it's among non-disabled athletes as well. She's always up there, and she's always doing TV and raising awareness and everything. And Donald Rampady in the quads division, he's from South Africa as well, and way back when, before he retired, you had Lucas Satoli from South Africa. So there's fewer of them, but the players in South Africa who do get on the tour and do get quite high up really do make a noise and try to build a legacy. I think the problems there is the funding and the finance in more developing countries isn't there, and what wheelchair tennis needs. If you're going to take junior in wheelchair tennis, you've got to realise that you're not just paying £100 for tennis shoes. You're paying, you know, $7,500 for a tennis chair as well, and then the training and the fact that, you know, like I use tape to grip my hands to the tennis racket because I can't grip it. So I mean that's £20 a month for me. You know, and the actual costs are higher. And so the funding needs to be there, and the funding needs to be in place. I mean, people like KG, so the ITF have a development program, which players like KG and that have come through on because they've been identified by the ITF as having potential, and they go to camps, tennis camps, and get the best coaching and everything to give them a step up, and it's all funded and stuff. But I think, yeah, the countries you're seeing excelling are the ones who are putting lots of money and lots of funding in the way of performance development, and also grassroots development, because they seem to understand that you can't have those elite level performers without having a good grassroots program, because that's where they come, you know, in any sport. Where do your top players come from? They come from having played the sport at grassroots level as a youngster or as a teenager. And so I think it's recognizing that at that grassroots level, kind of putting away the thinking that the audience that you're kind of trying to attract is only over the age of 50 because it's disability. There are young disabled people too, and they want to get out there and they want to be competitive. And I think, you know, I think it's realizing that.
Some as young as 3, as you experienced today. We've got one more question for you from the chat before we let you go. What's the trickiest part for new players to learn? So somebody who's maybe tempted or is just starting to play, what is one of the common themes you see, Gemma, amongst wheelchair players where it's like, this is a particular moment that is tricky?
I think what people don't realise is the movement is so important. So the reason why you see different players excelling on different surfaces in the wheelchair tour is because the different surfaces do different things to your movement. The actual ideal world is to keep the chair moving at all times, because the minute you stop the chair, it becomes difficult. and you're back to that first push. I think you can have players like I came to wheelchair tennis after having played, pedestrian tennis. You can have the forehand, the best forehand in the world, or the best backhand in the world, but if you can't move to get the ball to hit that forehand in the first place, you're actually stuffed. Like you could be like, well, I could have
I
done
like
that
the way you use
forehand.
the word stuff. That's a good word. I might bring that into my vocabulary.
But it really is, and people don't realise the importance of moving. And I think that's the thing where, when I've experienced coaching, one of the reasons why me and my tennis coach got on so well is he wasn't afraid to say, like, he understood that I had hand function issues and stuff, and that my movement, that would kind of impinge my movement slightly. But
Yeah.
if he knew I was just being lazy, he would just say it. Like, he'd be like, you can get that ball all
Gemma,
day.
were you being lazy? Were you?
I can have my lazy moments. And I think that what I would probably say is, yeah, I mean, and that's the biggest thing to hard. And coaches, when they're coaching wheelchair tennis, I think they need to know the importance of the movement, like the fan drills. The fan drills exist to get you to get better at movement. They are boring as anything. Like, they're not the most exciting bit of learning to play wheelchair tennis, but they are what makes it better along the line. There is a shot that's specific to wheelchair tennis as well, which is the reverse backhand,
Okay.
which is basically you're hitting the backhand with your forehand side, and your backhand has to be one-handed, because you can't keep moving the wheelchair and do a double-handed backhand. I mean, there is one player on the tour who does use the traditional backhand, which is Joe Gerard, but he's quite tall. So the reason why the reverse backhand came into use is because when you sat in a chair, if you use the traditional backhand, because of the camber on the wheels, because of where your knees are positioned as well, you can end up. I mean, I struggle to make 5 foot. I mean, I remember trying to do the traditional backhand at first in my wheelchair, and I ended up hitting my knees and everything. I had bruises everywhere because it just wasn't possible to get a decent kind of touch on the ball without maiming yourself at the same time. So I mean, you can still slice. I am the master of slice. Actually, I was coaching a young kid yesterday, and we were doing backhand, and it was a pedestrian player, and he was 5, and I was helping him with his backhand, and then he kept coming out with all these backhands with a massive slice on, and I was like, oh no, now everybody's going to know who's taught him.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh no, I've given him that slice. But it's dangerous, that slice, I'm telling you. On grass, it's dangerous. But they're probably 2 of the biggest things, like learning the reverse backhand. But I would still say movement of the chair. You've just got to move the chair. And if you're having a day where you're feeling lazy, it's not a nice place to be on court, because you're like, I don't really want to move.
I've got an image on the screen right now. I don't know how explicable, if this helps give people a good idea. But if not, then people out there can go and check YouTube on how to hit the reverse backhand, and that might give. I just saw a 5-minute video. I'm just a bit wary of sharing that video, and it's actually copyrighted, so I didn't want to do it right now. But
I did the script for that video, so it's fine.
Oh, okay. This one, this one here.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
yeah.
Let's see. Go on, keep talking.
It was quite funny because actually my coach worked with Stuart Wilkinson, who used to be Alfie's coach, a lot to try and get to grips with the techniques of wheelchair tennis and stuff. And Stuart Wilkinson and my coach know, they actually had a WhatsApp group, which they included me in, which was called the Anti-Slice Mafia, because they were so desperate for me to hit a reverse backhand rather than a slice. Okay. So when I had to do this video on the reverse backhand, they both loved it because I had to kind of say how good it was.
Why? So this is your writing here that we occasionally see on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. So yeah, this is unique to wheelchair tennis, right?
Yeah.
Does it involve some kind of pirouette? Is that what's going on at some point, or
yeah? I mean, naturally, when you're hitting, the wheelchair moves dependent on your hip function. So your hips also help move the chair. So if you look at the elite level players' chairs, they're really close to their hip.
Oh, wow, I've just seen it. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so
that's something else.
Yeah. So you will often find the chair moves with players, whether they hit a forehand or backhand. when they've not even got contact with
I guess for the opponent, this takes you by surprise. Is that part of the or what's
it's
going
more
on?
the spin that it creates. So you can
Okay.
hit with spin, and the ball can bounce high, which makes it more challenging for your opponent. Like, it's used a lot during the game, this reverse backhand. The reverse backhand is used more in the game than the slice.
Right.
So it's used a lot, so people expect it, but it's the spin. But it also helps. I will say, it also helps when you're playing against standing players. So when I play at my club, it's social tennis. If I hit reverse backhand, because the spin is so different to something that they're used to
Oh, I
dealing
just
with.
saw the way that bounced off the court. My goodness.
Yeah, because the spin is so different to what you're used to seeing with the traditional backhand. I know I can win points against the standing players at my club by just hitting a reverse backhand, because they're like, "Oh, what is this?"
You're pretty adept at it. 'Cause, I mean, you told us about the slice, but you're also adept at this reverse backhand, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I can hit it. I do prefer the slice. My my argument is always when people say you should use the reverse, like when Stuart and Max were saying to me, "You need to hit the reverse backhand more." I was like, Jordan Wiley, Wimbledon titles with a slice.
Got it.
So I mean, I think it's because, like, when I was playing standing tennis, the slice was used a lot in the women's game. It wasn't as hard hitting as, in the early 2000s. Yes, we started to progress because the Williams sisters existed and they moved the game forward and stuff, and how the game was played, but it hadn't kind of moved forward to where it is now. So the slice was still used a lot in the women's game. So when I was training, I was training my slice, and my slice is quite effective. I annoy people on court with my slice, because I slice it so much that it literally just drops over the net. So even with the second bounce, it's tough to get to. Or it'll bounce and it'll spin completely off the court. So the only way they're getting it is if they climb over the bench on the next court. I have had players use some quite, when I've played at nationals and lower ITF levels, when I've hit that shot, I've had some players using some quite choice language when that's happened, and then I'm getting a, "Oh, Gemma." So I still love my slice. You'd have to do a lot to get me away from the slice, but I do realise as a player, the reverse backhand is a more effective shot because it moves it moves the player back. It forces them to hit a high ball and it doesn't give them much time. So yeah, but I will always hit a slice over a reverse backhand. But Stuart Wilkinson isn't watching.
Variety is what makes this sport amazing. Gemma, on that note, I want to say a big thank you for coming on board today. I hope we haven't missed any storylines from Australia.
No, I don't think. I think we've covered everything. Yeah, the only thing I would also mention about Australia is that I would say it was one of the most inclusive Grand Slams this year. So as well as a wheelchair tennis draw, we also had a learning disability tennis draw and a deaf tennis draw. So I didn't get a chance to get over to those because they were running at the same time as the wheelchair tennis draw, and it was so manic because the wheelchair tennis draw had extended, the quads had extended to 16. It was like 5 very full-on days, but we did have more variations of inclusive tennis in the Australian Open, which I would love to see at the other slams. I'd love to see being done at the other slams. I mean, I think Australia so inclusive. Like I said to you before, the way they worked with me when I couldn't get over, and inclusive in so many ways, and giving so many players who wouldn't necessarily have a platform otherwise that's as big as a Grand Slam, the opportunity to be on that platform. So all I will say is bravo Tennis Australia for leading the way on that.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember us having a chat back in September about the different slams and your preferences and where they sort of do better than others, perhaps. And that's an episode we did there, recorded together in September after the US Open. So make sure you check that out, and you'll get a full-on answer to some of the questions that we didn't address today because we've addressed them before, such as I remember you surprising me a little bit by saying basically the Australian Open was your sort of amongst the 4 preferred slam because of some of the things that you've also highlighted today that Tennis Australia have done recently, but also in the past. And also just some standout moments. I remember you telling me about hairs on the back of your neck standing up when seeing some of the wheelchair legends of the sport and the crowds that would be involved down under So make sure if you are keen to learn more about that, do check out that video. But also any of the interviews we've done with Jenna. I think we've done at least 3 regarding maybe even 4. I know we did. No, we did Wimbledon. I think. I don't think we did the French
Yeah.
Open. Wimbledon, US Open, and now Australia. Plus, I know you came on for a little while. Or we had a pre-recorded video regarding a preview to the men's singles final in the US, and we'll have you on again throughout this year. Hopefully, I know you're going to be super busy around the time of the Paralympics, but if you can come on after that to talk about the wheelchair tournament as well, at some point, we're pretty flexible. Anytime, a week or so afterwards, that'd be great as well.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Always love talking to you guys, and always love the questions as well, because they're so insightful. Like, you know, they come from a part of wanting to know more, and it's really, you know, for me, sometimes people say, do you ever get bored of answering the same? And I'm like, no, because you have to realize that not everybody's exposed to wheelchair tennis the same me. So for some people, the fact that they see 2 bouncers on court is kind of weird. So, and that because it's not being exposed that much, apart from at the slams, and even then the broadcasters can do better. It, you have to have watched it to realize those little like idiosyncrasies and rule changes and stuff like that.
Looking forward to being on again later on in the year. I don't think we'll be talking to Gemma, Queen of the Reverse Backhand. I've dropped my slide, Stevenson, anytime soon. So we'll look forward to speaking to you again soon. And anyway, listen, Gemma, once again, thanks for coming on board today.
Absolutely, no worries. Absolutely loved it, John, as always.
And to everybody else, thank you for stopping by. And you know the drill.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.